This is something that happened to me when I was about 15 years old and was staying at my friend's house. I still get spooked just thinking about it, and I thought I might share it. I think it was on a Saturday that we were watching old movies, playing video games, or whatever he suggested that we'd do, like going for a walk in the forest and whatnot. I was bored and thought, why not? He said there were some old abandoned houses in the woods that I had never been to before or heard about before. I thought that was pretty cool, and he told me that he could show me around. So we headed out, and I brought a flashlight with me because it's getting dark. We began to walk through a trail surrounded by some unusually tall trees. This trail was getting deeper and deeper into the woods, and was soon not much more than tall grass, stones and trees. We had walked around for 30 or 40 minutes when it started getting really dark. I then asked if he was sure that we're going in the right direction when I suddenly noticed a small Dutch colonial style house peeking out of the trees. It was white and I think it had some kind of porch on it. It appeared deteriorated and truly abandoned from the outside. I turned around and noticed that my friend wasn't there anymore. I thought he was playing around with me, so I just kept casually walking towards the house and pretended that I didn't care. I looked through one of the windows and didn't see anything, but I heard a distinctive giggle above me. The weird thing is that it definitely sounded like a middle-aged woman, not my friend. I was a bit frightened and call out my friend's name, but he doesn't answer. I was so scared and angry that I yelled it really loud. The next thing that happened is something I can only describe as hell-breaking loose. I heard a woman crying and wailing loudly and letting out these horrifying guttural screams. I didn't even know where it come from, but I was too terrified to do anything. Besides running, I go straight through the woods. Occasionally I tripped over rocks and stuff and ended up getting a big scar on the back of my lower leg. I reached the road and I think I'm about 15 minutes or so away from seeing a car, and luckily I find one. The guy was nice enough to drive me home and said, do I need help because I'm bleeding? Here's a kicker though. I checked my phone and my friend had sent me 2 messages saying why did I leave and where was I. I was happy that he was alive and I asked him if he's still in the woods. He didn't know what I was talking about and said he's been home the whole day. I thought he was joking, but I saw the first 2 messages were sent around the time when he should have been in the woods already. It's been many years since, and we're not hanging out anymore, but he maintained for a long time that he didn't go into the woods with me and that he was home the whole day when I suddenly just left without warning while he was in the bathroom. He said that he didn't know about any home in the woods either. So I'm not exactly a paranormal believer per se, though I have had a couple of experiences while hunting or hiking that I can't necessarily explain rationally. The most unnerving one probably happened 7 to 8 years back. Now normally, I would hunt on some property that my family owns. Don't even remember the reason anymore that I decided to hunt on public land this time. Probably just a change of scenery. I remembered that it was evening in fall, but fairly uncharacteristically warm that day. I got to the access road and pulled off to the spot that everybody pulls off to park and walk in, and noticed that there's a couple of old boys already there. Nothing too weird about them, except there's no truck or vehicle for them to have pulled in on. They didn't have guns with them, but they're dressed in hunter orange, but at this time, I figured that they're backpackers or campers. At the time, we're not too far away from this spot in a campground, so it's not uncommon for folks to spend weeks away from their family for some peace or quiet to go to a hunting trip. Anyway, they seemed friendly enough and there was absolutely nothing said to make them seem any different than hundreds of other fellows I've met hunting. They're basically some hillbillies from the sounds of it, and we talked for a couple of minutes and they shot off. And I sat on my phone for a bit trying to give them a head start because I was afraid they'd drive off some of the squirrels. Except I clearly didn't wait long enough, Probably like 10 minutes up the trail, it curved to the left and I heard noises coming from directly ahead. It sounded bigger than a squirrel, but also, it didn't seem like any animal that should be there. When I crept off the path ground and started to drop so I'd be able to look down and see my new pals, I realised that nothing's acting right. This is going to be hard to explain without a visual, but they were just moving, but not like normal people. Their movements were jerky, almost like they'd forgotten how to walk, and things like their knees and joints weren't able to bend. I didn't stick around too long, because it was terrifying. I backed away slowly and quietly to the trail, and then get into my car, then driving off. Now, I've spoken with several open-minded outdoorsmen in the area, and they think maybe they're on drugs, but I don't know. It just seems a lot different to the movement of people on drugs and looks very unnatural and scary. Okay, so I live in the woods around the Carolines. I am just playing soccer outside and it's just me and my dog, and I suddenly hear some noise. I realise then that it's music. I have no idea where it come from, but it sounded like wind chimes. It sounds like there's multiple, but it got creepier. I was tempted to follow it, but I did not know what it was. I was freaked out and went back to my house. Come out a few hours later and I can still hear it coming from the woods. It suddenly stops again just as soon as it started, and now I'm totally freaked out. I'm from a different country, and I'm similar to what you guys call a park ranger, but with some subtle differences. Now basically, similar to a park ranger, I would have an area that I would have to cover and take shifts during my job. Often we didn't have too many crazy things happen. The biggest issue that we would find was when people would be lost out in the snow, they could literally freeze to death if they couldn't get help. It can be very difficult to get a fire going whenever there's snowfall, so this is something we're often very careful of. Now, there was one particular day that I was on my patrol like normal. Everything was normal and I didn't find anything, so I headed into the station for the day. As I headed in, I got word of apparently a potential missing persons, but also to be advised that this person's a little bit off and potentially armed. We were basically getting called in from the HQ to say be very careful because this situation feels a bit weird and this person may potentially be hostile. Apparently some people had been really scared of this person who encountered them. They said they wouldn't talk sense when they're encountered, and they would have something in their hand at all times, often concealed in their jacket. So yeah, that was what I had to investigate. I didn't feel very confident in doing so, and to be honest I was pretty annoyed because the day was going very well up until this point. So, with not much of a choice, I set out looking for this person, thinking maybe they're completely deranged and we can try and get them somewhere to get help. So I begin. Now as I set out, the snow clouds have formed again, but there's not really much snow now. I make my way across the main path and I can see that there's no other footprints around here, so obviously there's nobody else about, which is quite a good thing for me. I start to head downhill and the trees around me are absolutely massive. The good thing is it blocks any wind perfectly, so I'm not actually too cold. Plus where I am, if I start sliding and falling it'll be quite funny because I'll go quite far before I stop, but I'll cover lots of ground that way. I mean man, I'm almost half tempted to do it because it'll make my search much quicker. Now, while I'm walking, I notice there's some strange markings on some of the trees. They look similar to our own ones which mark the path that people go onto, but they're subtly different. It's almost like somebody's tried to copy our version, or it's like a fake version which somebody's just spray painted onto the trees without a stencil. It's pretty weird. I call into the base and ask if we put any new ones down, and they confirm that there shouldn't be anything here. That's a little odd. I think maybe, just maybe, someone was here and was using it as a marker to find the way back to civilization if needed, but I can't really be too sure. So I make a mental note of it and continue walking, and then I find another marker which is really strange. I get just past the second one, and I realise one of the trees has fallen recently. I get right up to the bottom of it, and there's some axe marks there. This is weird because this area is pretty well protected, and I know you definitely can't do that. I start to think maybe these people were doing some illegal logging, and they don't want to be caught. Yeah, it makes more sense to me now. I know I have to be cautious because some of these guys are a little bit crazy where I live. And I don't know, living out in the isolation and snow can really take its toll on you if you're not prepared for it. But looking around, I can see the snowfall's still fresh, so there's nothing really to worry about. For some reason in this moment I felt relatively lonely. I don't know why, I just felt it suddenly. It was kind of hard to describe. It felt basically like I was miles and miles away from people, which is really bizarre because usually I never feel this out here. Yes, I'm only a radio away from help, but that doesn't make you feel close to people here. I'm suddenly interrupted as another one of these markings comes parallel to our own ones, the sort of fake version that I saw before. That's really odd. Maybe they were marking trees that they wanted to cut down, but if this was the case, they were absolutely crazy to mark it next to where they know that we're going. Again, something that doesn't make sense. I can see another one just off another tree parallel to the original one I saw it on, and I think this is really weird. I know that I have to keep moving now and try and cover some new ground, but I'm not feeling very confident. I eventually break away into a new area which is away from where those markers are, and actually start to feel a lot better. I'm being very careful of where I'm going because it's very easy to get lost in situations like these. Another thing you have to be careful of is if you slip and fall, you can really easily get hurt, and people don't consider that if you don't move much trying to tend to a wound, you can get cold very quickly, so I'm very cautious of this. I keep checking in on my radio periodically just so the team back at the base know that I'm okay. I ask if anyone else has seen anything and I get negative. This is strange. Now, just as I round the corner, I can suddenly see somebody standing dead still in the centre of the path. They're not moving at all, and strangely don't seem to have noticed me. I can also see them holding something in their hands. Thinking it's one of the other guys out here working with me, I quickly put a radio call across, and then they say nobody's here but you, just be cautious, okay? I say Roger, and call out to the person. I say, hey, I'm here to help you, are you okay? And there's nothing. I say it again, I'm here to help you, and I don't hear a thing. The weirdest thing is that this person doesn't move whatsoever. They literally just stand there completely still, holding whatever it is up ahead of me. Now, I'm getting a little bit worried now, but I have to go forward to investigate. I mean, it's literally a part of my job. For some reason, when I start to advance, the trees feel somehow more menacing than before. I know this person hasn't come off the path because from where I'm standing I can't see any footprints in the snow, so that leads me to my next question for myself. Where did this person come from? I call out hey one more time, somewhat quieter. Not because I'm scared, just because I've advanced a bit further, but this person just stays there, completely still. I then decide just to stay still for a moment, and almost in sync with me, this person just walks off, absolutely ignoring me and the situation almost, which is really bizarre. They go slightly towards a bend and I realise I'm not going to be able to see them soon. It kind of goes up a hill on the left side so you can't really see. There is a large clearing to the right, which is where a frozen lake is, but I'm not going to go there, and I know this person isn't. Now with the person out of sight, I felt a little bit more safe and continue onwards. I stop every few seconds and just rest on a tree and try and look for any movement because I don't know if this person is alone or not. When I do so, I don't see much of anything. Now, I decide to move to the lake. I can see some tracks here too, like somebody's been skiing or on sleds or something. And I realise that I've got a pretty good vantage point here. I realise that if I continue walking, I should be able to see everything. I'm unsure what to do because I don't know how well frozen that the lake is, so I decide it's best to leave it. As I turn on my hill, the pressure confirms that with a loud crack sound. It's actually quite annoying for me at the time because it makes it easy for the person to know where I am. So anyway, I eventually make it up to where this person should have been, and I can't find much of anything. There are more tracks that lead off into the woods, and I decide that I'm going to have to follow it. Just as I go to turn in the direction where I think the person's gone, I see something on the floor which looks really odd. I can't be certain, but I see something that looks just like blood and a couple of drips of it. So that only means one of two things: either this person's bleeding or an animal is. And neither are good because A, it would mean there's some kind of illegal hunting, or B, the person's in some kind of trouble and might need some help. Or C, I don't know what it is, and that's what my mind went to. Annoyingly, it's my job now to follow the tracks and go into the direction where the blood is, but not before I radio in what's happening. My team says that they're gonna triangulate my position somewhat, and they're gonna send some other guys over, which actually makes me more confident. Again, my team tells me that I must proceed with caution because help isn't that close, and I'm out on my own here. I say roger and continue. Upon my walk, I realise more of these strange markings around. I decide that I should try and count however many there are just so I can report it to the guys later, but I now avoid this and the well-trodden path. I now go into the wild as I follow in the footprints of this person who I can't seem to make contact with. Now, I begin following the tracks for a little while. I must have done so for a good 10 minutes and I don't seem to be getting any closer, which is really odd. Until suddenly, I can just about make out another silhouette further up the path from me. This one doesn't seem to be moving too much. Again, I think this is really strange because there shouldn't really be anyone else out here, and it looks different from the person that I've seen before. It's strange because they seem to vanish off into the trees too. I now see something again which makes my heart skip a beat. There's more blood. There's blood where this person was too, and I can see it from some kind of snowshoe. You know when you can see the footprint of something? Although this one had spikes from obviously being adapted to cold weather. There was a bloody footprint which was leading off further away from me, different from what I'd seen before. The footprints didn't match, and that's really odd. Unsure whether it is an injured person walking around or I just don't know what was happening, I radio it in again, but unfortunately it doesn't go through because the area that I've went to has hills which are basically blocking my radio from working. So now I've got a dilemma. I can go in one of two directions here. I can try and follow the first person or the second. I opt for following the second person. I let out one call trying to get their attention, but nobody replies again. I then decide to follow the footprints, and just before I set off, I can see a silhouette again up on the bridge. Now they've rested something on the side of the bridge, but I can't really see what this is. I pick up the pace a little bit and feel more brave now as I go to investigate what's happening. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm well trained for situations, but I'm really becoming further and further out of my depth here, especially because I don't actually know the territory too well. I eventually get up to the bridge and I can see something resting on it. I can then see lots of blood dripped onto the bottom of something. I then get closer and to my horror, I realise that it's an axe and there's blood dripping from the tip of it, and it looks very fresh. Weirdly, I also can't see any other footprints as I take a moment to look around. I don't know where this person has gone, and I sure as hell don't want to find out anytime soon, but I have to. And then realise that this crazy person must have gone into the flowing stream now. To give you an idea of how insane that is, if you fall in here for less than a minute, you're pretty much dead, and that's just what this person seems to have done. Now, I was so excited to at least have some kind of lead, but I knew it's going to be very dangerous to follow them around here. That only means one thing though, that they must have went downstream. Thank God I managed to get radio signal again, and I call in exactly what's happened, and they say they're going to get the police involved, and they say you can head back or keep following, it's up to you. I then somewhat stupidly say that I'm going to head back, but decide to investigate a little bit more. I've realised that maybe a crime's just been committed, or at the very least I've killed some kind of animal and I need to at least help. Maybe that was the other person earlier that I saw, I don't know. I head back, now going slightly off the course again, and follow the stream downhill. I follow this until eventually I can see some more footprints leading into the forest once more. I can then see a trail of blood, and I seem to be getting closer because the tracks seem more and more fresh. Just as I think I'm onto a lead, I hear somebody scream out. Now this is an absolutely belching, blood-curdling scream, something like I've never really heard before. It almost doesn't sound human, it was that bad. I then round a corner and I can see what only looks like a crime scene from a horror movie. There's blood everywhere and multiple trees knocked over, and scratching marks on some of the trees. I've never seen anything like it. It literally looked like somebody had been mauled by a bear. Now, what really scared me is that I didn't hear that scream once again. I looked around and I can't see any more tracks, and I'm met with this deep fear in my belly, and my lips go dry as my saliva dries up. I look around and I really can't find any source or body as to what's happened out here. That's what really confuses me. I expected to find a wounded person here that I'd be able to medevac, but nothing. Realising that I've seen enough and starting to feel very sick, I decide that I'm gonna have to trek back the way that I've come. But now I realise I'm just a little bit lost, and I don't know what to do. I decide the best thing to do is have a quick look around to see if there's anybody dying, but there's literally no one. I then realise that I'm probably in a weird situation now, and once again, I hear another sound. This one's completely different. I hear my own name. Thinking it's one of the other workers here, I say, "Oh, thank God you're here. Come help me quick." And then I can see a figure just off in the distance in all black, slowly raising their finger up to their lips to be quiet. A gesture that spoke thousands of words to me, and the most important one was to run. I then turn around, and before you knew it, I was heading back where I'd come from. This wasn't one of the guys I worked with, and this definitely wasn't somebody in trouble. This was something completely different. Somebody was trying to trap me then or there, or somehow wanted me to see whatever had just happened. Now I can never be sure where the source of the blood was, but that person didn't seem to have any on them. I can only imagine that they caused it. I jogged for probably 15 minutes before making it back to one of the main trail paths. I stupidly fell into a frozen over puddle and get very wet, and that annoys me because I think I'm going to start getting frostbite on my toes, and I don't want to lose any toes, but it feels like it's going to happen. I now, funnily enough, have to walk across some boards and bits of wood over some water, which is hideously dangerous, but I don't really have much of a choice now. I sprint, and then I see another body. This time, paralyzed with fear, I drop down to the ground and wait. This person's looking around, and I realize that something's different this time. I put my radio onto the lowest volume it goes, and I make contact and say, "Are you there?" And thankfully, they put the radio up to their ear. I say, "Hey, I'm right next to you, and is this?" and one of the other workers' names. But strangely, they don't reply. Thinking maybe I've gone through to the wrong person, I switch channels a couple of times and make it through. I then ask them for the location, and to my horror, they're in a complete different place to me. I then see the person up ahead of me put the radio down and continue walking with something in their hands. They were dressed in camouflage, basically a white sniper's suit kind of thing. This is not something we would wear. They were trying not to be seen. I don't know how long I was on the ground for, but it was cold enough that I couldn't feel my hands and feet. I slowly get up and start to kind of crawl like they do in the military through the woods for a bit longer. I managed to make it out to one more clearing, and then I sprint for a good another 10 minutes. My feet are burning now, and my eyes actually hurt from being out in the snow for so long. I sprint and eventually call in for help, and I ask for a proximity of the closest next worker to me, of which is given. Now, seeing this person just coming up over the horizon is like something I'll never forget. I've never felt such relief in my life, almost like I'd become accustomed to the tension and forgot how it was to feel normal. I run over to them and I quickly blurt out everything that's happened, and I have to stop a few times and repeat myself because I'm not really talking cohesively. I then explain there's lots of people out there and I think something horrible's happened. This worker then informs me that the police are also dealing with this situation and there's quite a big search, and he quickly takes me over to his truck and gets me warm again. I sit there drinking coffee with him for a little bit as we listen on the radio, and we hear one of the law enforcement say that they've located a body. That was enough to send chills down my spine, and suddenly I didn't feel so warm from the coffee. A couple of hours later, I have to give a statement to the police of what happened, and can you believe this? They thought I might have been one of the suspects. It was only after I gave my full statement that they realised it wasn't my fault. I then say to them, "What did you find?" And they don't tell me too much, but they just say that they found a body that they're trying to identify, and they were murdered with definitely some kind of blunt weapon like an axe. I then explain exactly where it should be, and they say to leave the rest with them. We did eventually get an update from the law enforcement who says that other than finding the body, they went to that exact bridge and couldn't find any forensics, and also not the axe. That was to my absolute shock, because I saw it right there with my own eyes. They say they saw some footprints leading off of the trail and into the water, but not much else. They think somebody gone back there to clean up the scene. And shockingly, they never found the blood site that I found myself. My work were very supportive and understood why I needed a long time off, and thankfully supported me in changing jobs. It's something I don't really like thinking about much to this day, but from the conversations with my bosses and law enforcement, we think that there are a couple of killers out there who were targeting the hiker who they managed to get, then also myself, and they were using radios to communicate with each other to find me, and I must have just escaped. It's something that still haunts me to this day, and I know it's something I'll never forget. How could I? Red River Gorge is a beautiful and huge park full of wildlife, rock climbing, waterfalls and dense forests, gorges and beautiful views. The place feels truly isolated, disconnected from the rest of the world. One evening, my boyfriend Dee and I decided to go camping at the gorge. We went out and tried to find a campground that was as backwards as possible. Sites were spread far from each other. Our site, that was on the edge of a very steep drop-off. We arrived at sunset and quickly set up. By the time we fully set up, the sun had set and we began making a fire. About 20 minutes into relaxing, we began to hear howling that doesn't go away, and it doesn't sound like it's far from us. We both freaked out by the realization that there were wolves nearby, but we tried to not overreact and continued to sit by our fire. 10 minutes later, I start hearing a faint yelling about 15 feet away past the cliff's edge. Now, I told Dee to be quiet and listen, and we're both frozen out of fear. A woman was now screaming. I couldn't make out any words at that point, but it was a deep, gurgling shriek, a noise that I've never heard a person make in my life before. Then I heard it. She was screaming, "Help, please someone help. Someone please help me," repeating this over and over again, howling at the top of her lungs. I'm terrified. She could have been turned around in the dark and fallen off the cliff. She could have been attacked by wolves or a bear or bitten by a snake. At this point we both sprinted into my car, frantically climbing inside, locking the doors. I tried calling the police but have no service. I threw the car in reverse and sped down the dirt road to find anyone that could help. The shrieks continued. I didn't make it far before I found 3 young men standing on the edge of the forest. I slowed down and cracked my window, still hearing that woman begging for help, and asking the men if they heard that. How could they have not heard it? I told them it was a young woman screaming in the forest. Then, 2 of them went sprinting into the darkness. Without questioning me or anything, the other one just stood by my car, assuring me he had no idea what was happening. While the 2 men were somewhere in the forest, I drove further down the dirt road until I found a spot to turn around at. When I came back, the screaming had stopped, and the men were back by the side of the road. I slowed down and asked them where the woman was, and one of the men that had run into the woods said, "Don't worry, it was actually just a kid messing around." I just said okay. I drove back as quickly as possible. We left the campsite and went straight home. Once out of the woods, we called the local police station multiple times to no answer. I know it wasn't a child. I've never heard such primal screams in my life. It made my skin crawl and my heart race just thinking about it. What did those men do that night? What was I a witness to? I live just where farmland meets the edge of the suburbia, on an island off the coast of BC. The climate here is sub-temperate rainforest, so the natural and untouched landscape is incredibly wild, dense and lush. I'm keen on endurance cycling, and I take full advantage of the trail network in the forest surrounding my area. I work long hours, so most of my winter rides are in complete darkness with my trusty trail light. One section of my home trail winds through a rainforest bog full of hundreds of trees. They're huge. It's absolutely beautiful in daytime. It feels like a magical place with shafts of sunlight piercing the fog, hundreds of different species of flora, and there's so many wild animals out there. It's really beautiful. Now at nights, my gut starts tightening as the thought of passing through this mile-long section of trail appears. One day about a year ago, I was lucky enough to get a chance to go for a ride through it, so I took it. It was cold and very rainy, with few other people out on the trail. I had packed thermos of hot coffee in my backpack, and I thought the rainforest-style bog was the best place to take a rest as any. Now, I chill out. I have an interest in botany, so I was looking closely at the lynches growing off of the huge Douglas fir. But suddenly, I felt distinctly not alone. No biggie. Lots of people use the trail, although not many are out there that day because the weather's so wet and cold. And that's when I heard it. A meow. That's odd because this isn't a good place for a cat to be alone. We have cougars and bears, but I hear a meow again. Except this time, it was canned and robotic sounding, like somebody playing a bad audio file with a cat. My gut starts to clench. It just sounded wrong somehow, and I can't figure out why. My hands were shaking when I unzipped my backpack to put my coffee thermo back in. I felt waves of nausea roll over me, and the air suddenly felt dense and thick. I was in a rainforest surrounded by trees and moss, but I felt like I can't get enough oxygen. I hadn't seen anyone for at least 10 miles, and I was distinctly aware of how far I was, and I couldn't really get any cell reception here either. Now, I hear the same meow again, but this time closer. I've never heard a cat like this before. It sounded like an imitation of a cat or a person saying meow. It was so tiny, cold and robotic. I now know that without hesitation, it's time for me to go immediately. I was panicked on the inside, but can't show fear, so I casually slung my leg over my bike and start riding. As soon as I got out of the bog, I ride the rest of the way home like a bat out of hell, glancing over my shoulder every few minutes. I can't see anything. I will never forget this experience for as long as I live. I've had some pretty disturbing things happen on my night rides, but nothing ever like this. I hate the fact that clearly something was imitating a cat, and I'm sure it was a recording. God knows who was out that deep into the forest too. I just hope I don't encounter this again. I used to love going for long hikes in the forest near where I live. I usually did it on summer's evenings. Yeah, I know this probably isn't the safest thing to do, but I always had my hunting rifle on me anyway. I mean, I'd be stupid not to. All it takes is one wild animal to go for you, and if you're unarmed, good luck to you. So anyway, I set out one summer's evening. I had my iPod playing some really chill songs and I felt really good about myself. I can't really get cell phone signal where I go because the trees cover it, but I like listening to my music. Now I was a good 40 minutes into my hike. There was enough moonlight for me to see where I was going. That's how I normally planned my hikes, when the moon was out of its brightest on the most clear days, so I can see everything. I'm really enjoying myself this night. I found true tranquility. I decided to stop for a minute, take off my headphones, and just pour out some of the hot chocolate I had in my flask. Now the second I do this, I have the feeling that I'm not alone, and I can't describe this feeling. It's almost like I'm comfortable in my own presence, but I don't want to be joined by anyone else, and this unsettles me. I just think I'm just being a little paranoid. I say to myself, thank God I've got my rifle, and I could have sworn I heard a laugh afterwards. No, it must have been just an animal, surely. So I go about drinking my hot chocolate. As I do so, and I'll never forget this, I hear someone whisper behind me, "Mind if I have some?" And a terrifying laugh follow. Now the next few seconds is a complete blur as I fumble, fall over getting up, grab my rifle, and scream myself and sprint in the complete opposite direction to where I heard the voice and back onto the trail. I try and scream out that I have a gun, but I can't get the words out. What's worse is I hear rustling behind me. I continue sprinting up the trail, only to slip temporarily again, and now on my back. I lay there wondering whether it's better to pretend I'm still. I look behind me, and I can see what appears to be the butt of a cigarette lit in the distance. Well, looks like I'm going to keep moving then. I get up again, and scream I have a gun and I'm not afraid to use it. What's worse, I'm sure I hear laughter in the distance after saying this. I sprint all the way back to my car. I don't even bother going back for my flask or anything. I immediately get on my radio and call it into the park rangers in the area, who say they're going to check it out and they want me to show them exactly where it is. I say you've got no chance and speed out of there. And the whole drive home, I can't stop thinking, who in their right mind was out there? How long were they stalking me for, and what on earth did they want? They clearly weren't mentally sane, whoever or whatever this was. Now, I don't believe in the paranormal, but this could have easily been something like that, because why would you be out there with no torch or anything? Maybe it is an insane person. All I know is that I never got to the bottom of it, and I never went out on my own in the woods at night again. I come from a big country family. We live on a farm. We raise our own food and meat animals, and we hunt and process. My dad's first cousin is even a licensed taxidermist, so we get a lot of hunting in. For a bit of backstory, on the homestead I grew up on and that we still live in, it was my parents, my pop's first cousin and his wife, me and my 4 sisters, and my 4 female second cousins. So 4 adults and 9 kids. And sometimes my pop's brothers come to stay with us too, especially during the hunting season. So hunting season is on, and my pops and his brother and the cousins we live with are all getting ready to go hunting. Some of the kids decide to tag along with me, my sister and my cousin. We get permission from one of my uncle's friends to hunt his lands away, and it's basically on several hundreds of acres of forest. Now, an important fact, during the time we're setting up, my pops and uncles are quiet while the 3 of us kids talk, and my voice hasn't changed. This is important. Us kids keep chatting away while the adults are just getting louder and feeling more energy while they check out the survival equipment, making sure the guns are clean and working, etc. Now there's a rustling in the thick brush around us, and suddenly 3 creepy looking guys enter the clearing. They literally stop dead. One of them has a hand on his knife on his belt. They're clearly drunk as hell. They kept looking between A and S and my pops and uncle, like debating something. My pops and uncle stand up. Last bit of backstory, every guy in my family is huge. I'm 19 and 6'5". My dad is 6'10" and 280 pounds, Jesus. Just deeply intimidating men. And so are my uncles. The guys laugh nervously as my Uncle V picks up one of his rifles, pointing it at them. The dudes start running off into the clearing like the devil's after them. My pops immediately says we're clearing out. My uncles don't question it, and neither do we. We're freaking out, and we're totally scared now. I mean, we're taking things down really sloppily, but my pops doesn't say anything about us messing up the camping equipment. When we get back, we instantly call the police, who unfortunately don't take it serious. We also told the owner of the land to be careful of his kids. The craziest thing is that, at that moment I realised A and S and me, with my unchanged voices, are the only voices that these guys would have heard, so they clearly come across here, trying to find some children on their own. Just down the road from where I lived a few years ago, in southeast Australia, is an opening into about 100 acres of woodlands and bush that I frequently went into when I was younger to do the usual things, riding and camping, etc. I was out driving at around 11:30 with my girlfriend, and as we're in the area, I decided to show her the woodlands while we sat in the area, as she enjoys everything to do with nature. And it's still summer, so it's an extremely warm night. I left my car with the light shining into the trees as we weren't going too far in, and it was pitch black inside, and the two of us just kind of sat around chatting and just relaxing. She was sitting on a sort of map of the area that had been used before, and there was some plastic around us. I kept getting this feeling like we're being watched though. Now I've read on here a few people have said that they felt like they're in danger, although nothing around them was off. Everything was fine, apart from the feeling I had, and I just can't explain it. After lighting another cigarette, my nerves are calmed. I scanned the tree line again and realised that it looked different than before. It was only after starting into the dark that I saw that there was now moonlight, lighting up all around us, and I can see a black shape blocking where we come from before. This I didn't see before. I've got goosebumps just typing this, but the only way to describe it is that all sound just ceased and everything went dead silent for a few seconds. I had this disgusting feeling of dread coming over me as I saw motion in the dark path, as something literally crawls towards us on all fours. Now I've seen nearly every animal in the outback here, and we don't have any large predators like in the US or Europe, but somehow I knew this thing was a predator, and it wasn't hiding from us, and it starts slowly coming towards us, clearly hunting. Now I don't know if my girlfriend saw it or not, as it was kind of dark, but I saw that thing get up on its two legs, just staring at us. Now I'm 6'4", and this thing was about another half meter larger than me, with arms that were far too long. I mean, they're literally reaching the ground. I'm terrified now. All I can make out was an off-white, almost yellowish fur colour it had, and a strange wolf-like head. I wasn't able to move as it stared at me, but it's at this point that my girlfriend gasped, which seems to break the silence between us. I grab her arm, and we sprint to the car, slam into the doors. This thing is tearing after us too. We both screamed. We tear out of there quick, not even looking back. It took us half an hour to calm down enough to talk about what we had seen. We both discussed it many times and know what we saw wasn't fake. We still have no explanation to it to this day. It's really scared me, and I've never went back to that area since. I always used to go camping a few years ago. I stopped doing it as much recently because of work, but I still get out there on the odd occasion, and I love it. I never had anything weird happen to me while I was actually camping. Some of the strangest things would happen when I was driving. It was never too bad. I'd just see strange lights in the sky, but I was sure that was just because I was tired. There was one thing I could never explain though, however. So I was driving back from a camping trip one summer's evening when I see somebody standing in the road. I don't know what they're doing, so I slowly drive up to them. They're not facing me. They're facing directly away from me. I turn my lights on to try and let them know that I'm there, but they don't move. I stop my car and get out and I say, "Hey bud, I need you to move out of the road for me please, is everything okay?" And I'm not kidding you, the second I finish my sentence, they fall to the ground. Well, I say they, all of their clothes do. It's almost like somebody just disappeared. I rub my eyes and I'm sure that I'm just sleep deprived and hallucinating. and I get back in my truck and slowly drive towards it. To my horror, I can see only a pool of blood exactly where I thought the person was standing, but it's dried blood like it's been there for weeks. I have no idea what it is. I immediately do a U-turn, scream to myself for what felt like an eternity, and get the hell out of there. To this day, I still have no idea what happened or who that was. There was nowhere for them to have run, and if they did, I would have saw footsteps in the dirt. There was neither. The drive home from work was always a long one for me. I had to drive through miles of woodland roads completely on my own. It was about an hour's drive, but I got used to it. I used to get finished on my night shift at about 10 o'clock, and I'd always turn on the radio and just enjoy my drive. There was one cold winter's night in December that really shook me up though, however. So I'm about 10 minutes into the drive, trying to demist my dashboard, when suddenly I have a feeling come over me like I'm being watched, and I can't shake it. It's a weird feeling, but it went away after a few minutes, and as I'm driving, I suddenly realise that I've lost my power steering. That's odd. It normally comes on again if this happens, which it rarely does, but then I see my lights go off and my engine cut out. It was almost like somebody let off an EMP in the atmosphere. Everything just stops, and I crawl to a halt. I'm confused out of my mind, but I'm not scared. And as I'm sitting there, I become aware of just how dark it is around me. It's literally pitch black because of the trees. 10 seconds later, the radio comes on, and I can hear a staticky voice saying, "Please don't be scared." And suddenly, my engine comes back on without me turning the ignition, and everything else goes back to normal. Needless to say that I was terrified in this moment. I drive back home as quick as I possibly can. Nothing like it ever happened since, and I still have no explanation to it to this day. I grew up in the south. There's tons and tons of beautiful places to see that haven't been taken over by concrete yet. It's nice. But along with that, it's pretty boring. Being a teenager and wanting to go out and have fun led to mostly improvising with your buddies and hoping that something good can come out of the night. There wasn't really a local spot to go and hang out at, like a club or cool bar, and the places that were close to us were boring, because we'd went to them so often. I'm sure if you've ever lived in a rural area, you can understand it. Something that I found a ton of enjoyment in as a team was just cruising around super late at night listening to music. I would fill up my gas tank, grab something to drink, and I'd just drive off until the sun comes up. It was a way to clear my head and relax. Those country roads are always fun to drive down at 2 AM, and was just also the right amount of spooky. I don't know why that made me laugh. Well, one night, I absolutely got more than I bargained for. I can't remember what month it was exactly, but I knew for a fact it was in the summertime, because I was out of school, and I also remember it being a comforting, chilled night. So, if I was to guess, it was probably around July or August. I was cruising around like I always did, and was completely worry-free. I had music blaring, and I'm in my zone. I decided to head down and park just out of boredom. This particular park is at the end of a very long stretch of desolated country road, but 'tis a really pretty drive because of that. When I say desolate country road, I don't mean that it's some dirt road that goes through the woods or anything crazy. It's a normal paved road, but There really is nothing on it after a certain point. The entire road takes about 20 minutes to drive down, and to get to the park after about 10 minutes into the drive. That's where the houses start spreading out further and further before there's none, and just a road leading to a park. I think a lot of the reason I like this drive is, at night, it's so creepy, and there's really no getting over that. I love the adventure of it. Now, the park isn't open for camping or anything. It's mostly just lots of land with walking trails and biking trails set up through miles of woodland. So obviously it's around 3 AM in the morning. It's pretty dead. I made it there and just did a slow normal loop around the park. The night before it stormed so badly. So I remember my parents and I had to take shelter because of the threat of a tornado. There ended up being no tornado, but the storms were pretty rough. Because of it, I come up on a fallen tree in the road that looped around to the exit of the park that must have been caused by the storm. It wasn't some massive tree or anything, but I knew for a fact that there was no way it could have gotten there from a car, obviously. It was pitch black everywhere besides the front of my car because of my headlights, and because of that, I immediately ruled out backing up the entire way. I just drove when I entered the park. I knew that this was super dangerous and there was no way. At this point on the road, there was flat land on each side of me. I figured that it would make the most sense just to back up to the grass beside me, just a little, and then drive back the way I come. It was a one-way loop around the park, but I wasn't really worried about going out and the wrong way because it's so late. So now I start to back off the road so I can get my car to turn around. All was good until I pull off onto the road. I totally didn't take into account how wet the grass was and the amount of mud there is. My car went absolutely nowhere. My back tyres are completely stuck and were spinning in places where I didn't think they could. I start getting scared now. It really isn't the most ideal of situations to be in. I immediately take my cell phone out of my pocket and saw that I had service, which comes as a massive relief. I call my parents and tell them what's happening and where I was. I'm pretty annoyed, but they said that they're going to pay for the tow truck to get me. My parents both drove their small 4-door sedans, and they said that they would be zero help in the situation that I'm in. It was about 45 minutes away from my home and most of human civilization, so I was pretty sure I'm going to be stuck there for at least an hour before someone comes to get me. It's a freaky feeling. But I try getting out of my head and just continue listening to music and playing on my phone. There's not really a lot I can do. After I kind of calmed down from the initial anger I had, I started to check out my surroundings. I didn't even notice at first because everything's going on, but in front of my car's placement was a field that's full of deer. It's the most I've ever seen in my life. There legitimately must have been 40 deer just walking around eating grass. The field wasn't directly in front of my car, but if I was to get out and throw a rock, I would have easily hit one. So if I'm gonna guess, they're probably about 30 yards away. I watch him for a little bit, but I'm quickly over it and start browsing through my socials on my phone. They seem to have been over it quicker than I was because they all go back to eating grass after figuring out I'm not going to attack them. After browsing my phone for 15 minutes, I finally get a call back from my parents letting me know that the tow truck guy's coming. He's about an hour and a half away. Still to this day, I remembered hearing that and thinking, "You've got to be kidding me." I understood that me and only me is the reason that I'm in this situation, so I can't complain. But I mean, come on. I decide that the smartest thing to do now is to make sure all the doors are locked and lay back and sleep for a bit. So that's what I do. Okay, here we go. So I wake up 45 minutes later to the feeling of being watched. I'm not sure if anyone has ever experienced it before. I don't know how common it is, but it's almost like a sixth sense was going off in my head telling me I need to wake up. Now. Waking up to that feeling in that situation is horrifying. I sit up and immediately check my surroundings to see nothing. I look through my car very quickly for any kind of weapon and find a pocket knife. A pocket knife. Great. I'm really scared now, even though I haven't saw or heard from anyone. I was shocked to see that the field of deers in front of me was still full. I don't know anything about the animal, but I guess they were just gonna move. But they're motionless. I call my parents back to see if they've heard anything. I decide not to mention how scared I am because I know it's gonna worry them. And there's no updates from the tow truck guy, so this can't be much worse. The last call just lasted a few minutes, and I felt like an idiot. They both had to wake up for work quickly after, and now they've spent over $100 to try and get me home, and they're worried about me. We hung up, and I looked up from the phone, and immediately went from 0 to 100 in a panic. All of the deer in front of me had perked up, staring in the same direction in front of them. Every single one of them. One of them stopped dead in their tracks, standing completely still. The others followed, looking at something. I put my high beams on and stared, waiting for absolutely anything to happen. But there's nothing. I tap my horn real quick. They don't even budge. That's what scares me. They were completely glued to what was in front of them instead of being scared by me. I know they were looking into the woods, but where I was, I can only see them. I can hear my heartbeat, and I grabbed my pocket knife and just waited for something to happen. I would say it was about a minute after I honked. Every single one of them in unison ran the opposite direction that I'm in. And now within 10 seconds, it's completely empty with just me in the field. I'm petrified in fear. I knew that staying in my car would be the safest thing, but I'm now stuck. My head is on a swivel. I'm freaking out in every possible way. I assumed that it's a bear or something, but it could have been absolutely anything. I was convinced at that point that it's the devil himself. I don't know what to do now. I knew that the tow truck was close by, but I have no idea where. I start shaking because of nerves, and just look around me to make sure nothing was by me, and focusing on the field in front of me. I did this for what felt like an actual eternity, sitting in complete silence and darkness in the middle of nowhere, waiting for something to jump out and attack me. Now 15 of the longest minutes of my life go by, and I start to see lights break through the tree line on the road. As it gets closer, I see it's a tow truck guy. The lights on in his truck feel like Jesus coming. He gets up to me and I jump out of the car and say, "Do you have a gun?" I tell him what's happened, and he said something's definitely nearby. He let me know that he grabbed his shotgun in the truck and assured me that it's probably a bear or bobcat. He gave me the whole "they're more scared of you than you're of them" crap. The tree was small enough for him to sort of bulldoze it out of the way and hooked up my car. He wasn't really listening to what I was saying about the story, but knew I was shaken up from it. The whole time, I still had my eyes glued on the field looking for anything. He was completely done with everything in about 15 minutes, and he told me that to follow his truck out of there and onto the main road's the best bet. I got in my car and was ready more than anything to get out of there. We start to move away from the spot I'm in, and I still have my head on a swivel, completely shaken up. As we're driving away, I look in my rear view, and just out of the way, I could see the partially lit up spot where I was from the vehicle lights. I watch in my rear view mirror as a man comes out of the tree line behind my car and walks into the middle of the road watching us. He's a huge person too. My heart stops. I legitimately start bawling out of fear. I can't see any details of the man. I don't care about that, honestly. The feeling when we're driving away was the worst of my life. He stands there the whole time. Now, he was there watching me, creeping up on me when I'm completely alone for a very long time. Maybe even coming up to my window watching me sleep. That's a feeling that I can't quite put into words. The entire time we're driving off, as long as I can see him, he doesn't move. He just watches. A million things are racing through my mind now. I was scared that there might have been multiple people waiting for us. I was trying to figure out if I should start beating on my horn or what. I decide all I want to do though is get out of there, more than anything. The second we finally got out of the park and was able to be on two roads, I drive past the tow truck driver doing at least 70 miles per hour. I run inside, quickly saying sorry to my parents and nothing more, run into my room, not sleeping for a single second that night. I was searching everywhere for what could have happened, escaped convicts, whatever, and I've come to the conclusion that I'm never going to know who was out there or what they were planning to do to me. I never told my parents this story either until years after, and it freaked them out when I told them it, even in my older age. I never went back to that park ever again, and I never will for as long as I live. Years ago, when I was still a teenager, my friend Justin and I would often go longboarding at night. As my friends and I are quite the night owls, we love the freedom of almost never seeing another soul on the roads or the paths we frequented. Even when using main roads, it would be very rare to see a car out so late in such a rural area. And you could see or hear them coming from very far away due to their headlights and the noise of the vehicle disrupting the peace. We were really into it at the time, and would often ride our boards for miles and miles, not seeing anyone until the sun was up. One particular night, we decided to ride a few miles away from our usual back roads to take one of our favourite hidden routes. It began with a narrow, paved path that was the only piece of land separating two sides of a long lake. It would often sink under due to rain, and we wanted to seize the opportunity to use it before it rained and went underwater again. It was roughly 2 miles long and extremely relaxing to ride through due to scenery. After making it to the end of the lake, we decided to keep moving and continue on our way and turn into a very close path that leads into a densely wooded area of a national park. As we came up to the first hill, we looked down at the bottom into the blackness. We both noticed what appeared to be a tiny ball of light moving down there. At first we think it's a park ranger, but it moves so strangely, and it was extremely difficult to make out what it is. Rather than shine our flashlights down, we curiously watched out for a few moments, whispering to each other what it could be. And all at once, that small light turned into multiple blinding lights and extremely loud revving sounds. Overwhelming our senses as to become accustomed to the darkness and silence. Acting purely on fear, we instantly turned around and ran as fast as we could, hearing yelling and revving gaining behind us. By sheer luck, we managed to run off the path into a very dark, very overgrown hole in the side of a hill overlooking where we just come from. We decided to hide in the natural dugout of this hill, hoping the plants and darkness would be enough to protect us from whatever was happening out there. We watched our pursuers ride out to where we originally were standing. There were 4 men, 2 on 4-wheelers, 2 on motorbikes, each other yelling something, but we can't make out what they're saying due to the distance. We felt safe enough to whisper softly to each other and speculate who these people could have been. Our first thought was that they might be park rangers of some kind, although we've never seen any in here, and we've been here a lot of times. And honestly, we doubted that this country had the budget for them this deep, unless they're on a big manhunt or something, which has happened in neighbouring states. Besides, these men are on vehicles that are inappropriate for paved bike trails. They're very angry too, and we don't know why. They call out for us for a while, yelling things like, "We know you're there, and we can see you, come out." We stay silent and decide to call on their bluffing instead of running. Eventually, I heard one of the men yell, "Find them now," and smash a bottle. That had erased any hope that they're rangers. We watched them split up, and each of them gone a different way down a series of paths on their vehicles, including the one that we've just come from. It took us what felt like ages to move. We're frozen in fear in that dugout, watching the lights from the vehicles travelling through the woods and paths. One of them already come in full circle and passing the point that we started on. I thought about calling for help, but I was too afraid. I was scared that the smallest amount of sound would give away our location. After waiting for the lights of the vehicles to reach our furthest distance yet, we finally summoned the nerve to get up and to run somewhere far enough away from them to make a call. We ran as hard and fast as we can through the woods, since their headlights gave their locations away on the paths. We would hide again whenever we felt like they're close. Our available hiding spots were getting progressively worse as the woodland became less dense, and the fear is overwhelming. Finally though, we emerged from the woods onto the intersection of the two main roads, far enough away from where we started. We ducked down into the ditch to call for help. I opened my phone. I noticed I had recent missed calls from one of our friends, Connor, who we're supposed to meet up with after our longboarding excursion. I called him and frantically asked where he is. Luck's with us again, and he hadn't given up on our plans despite us ignoring him. He's only a few miles away now, already heading in our direction. I gave him the names of two of the streets we're near. I explained that we need to be picked up immediately. He agrees to speed over to us while Justin and I were waiting and hiding. Thankfully, Connor arrived before any of them men did. We bolted into the back seat of his car, yelling for him to get out of there. He took off fast. Relief doesn't begin to explain how I felt after being safely driven home. After explaining everything that happened to Connor, we ended up just moving on with our night and decided not to call the police. We figured they'd be gone by the time any officer made it out there, and that we're putting ourselves at risk by admitting that we were breaking the law being out there. Justin and I later admitted to each other that when the Reverend started, we could see our minds going to chainsaw killer or something worse. Frustratingly enough, whatever them weird men saw that made them want to chase us so bad, we actually never saw, so they even had no reason to chase us. I never found out what they were actually doing or why they're so angry at us. I just know we're in a very dangerous situation, and to be honest, we're probably lucky to make it out of there alive. Me and my friend John loved to go for hikes in a national park that was a couple of hours drive away from where we lived. We'd often end up camping overnight. We'd always bring our camping gear in case we didn't make it back in time off the trail when it was dark. Now we usually did this in summer evenings. Oftentimes we'd never encounter anyone else except for the odd park ranger. It was normally nice to see them, and we'd have a good laugh for a little bit. I always respected park rangers and embraced them when I saw them. Now we set out on this one hike during one summer's evening 2 years ago. We're having a really good time. We're just talking about life. My friend's talking about not really liking his job much, and he's complaining about the hours and the work they have him do. He works in a hospital and really doesn't enjoy it, and I felt pretty bad for him. He's only starting and they're making him do all the dirty work pretty much. I wasn't too happy in my life either at the time. I had some big changes coming, and I was waiting on people, and I hate waiting. I really can't stand it. So we're talking about this for hours, and honestly, it's like a therapy session, and I really enjoy it. We keep talking and we're talking about the highs and lows of life, things that are coming, and things that we just want to see change. We're both saying it's surprising how that this time next year, we have no idea where we're going to be or what we're going to be doing. We're just putting the work in now. As we finish talking, we realise it's nightfall and there's already moonlight illuminating around us. I love moonlight, and we say, hey, how about we set up camp? John agrees. We walk further down, and just as we think we've found a good camping spot, we see another tent further up. Now there's this horrible smell there, so we're sure that whoever this is has hunted an animal, and they've left it out there, which is kind of disgusting, but they might be skinning it, getting it ready to eat. My friend goes over to say hello, and just say that not to worry about us, we're going to move further away so he can have his own space. And what do you know? A park ranger appears. You can see his hat from a mile away. As we go over there, we realise that there's something not quite right about this ranger. We can't really tell what. He doesn't have a normal uniform on. Well, he has a hat at least, but he has a big coat on. It's not cold enough for a coat. He says very few words when he speaks to us. He just says, yeah, I'm just setting up camp. We're out looking for someone, and that we should leave. I end up talking to him for a little while, and a lot of what he's saying doesn't make sense, and I get this really weird vibe from him, like he's looking at me but he's not, and he's trying to look through me at the same time, if that makes sense. He says, are we armed? And we say, yeah, we've both got hunting rifles, but we got a permit. He asks to see it, and my buddy shows him his. He says, that's okay, you haven't got to get yours out to me. And then John says that we need to get moving and should probably set up camp. He says fine, and the second he turns around, my buddy John grabs me hard by the arm and starts walking really fast, guiding me. Now I'm confused because, well, we're out in the middle of nowhere in a national park. There's going to be lots of places we can go and set up our camp. But there was something different about the way he grabbed me. It felt really urgent. I can't describe it. I don't need to know any more about the situation, and I just start to lightly jog with him. The second we're away from the camp, I turn back and I can see the ranger still watching us. He's standing in the exact same spot as before though, which is something I find very odd. The second that we get over this hill, John says run, and I don't question it, and we start sprinting as fast as we can back the way we've come. He starts telling me, I don't think that's a park ranger. I say, what? You're kidding me? He says, no, just run. And we run for miles and have to stop eventually to catch up with our breaths. He says, I don't think that was a dead animal we could smell, and that guy definitely wasn't a park ranger. I said, how'd you know? He's just wearing a coat. He said when he looked at our permits, he didn't even look. And then he said it was fine, and a park ranger would have to check both of us had permits, pretty much. I got a horrible sinking feeling in my stomach as I remember turning round and looking at the park ranger just standing there staring at us, and a lot of what he said didn't make sense. God, it all clicked now. We continued hiking into the morning and eventually make it back to our car. We drive immediately to the park ranger station, and the park rangers there say that nobody's out in that area and they're definitely not camping. Eventually, they sent out some people to go and investigate and got the police involved. It turned out that they suspect that this guy had murdered someone, and where we encountered him, he moved everything and hid the body. The police are still out there looking for it today. I'm currently a park ranger and I'd like to share a weird experience that I had before. Now, during these kinds of jobs, you'll see lots of weird things that you're not necessarily sure about. But luckily, because you work with other colleagues, you can always radio in to get more support if you need it and often get to the bottom of things. Some of the other guys who I'd been working with for a while had told me about a cabin that you should never go to. Apparently it was ancient, from a hunter or somebody like that, and they lived there for a long time, kind of off the grid, and there'd been some rumours from everybody saying that it was haunted. It's something that I never really believed, to be honest, but apparently sometimes at night if you heard whistling, that was where it was coming from. Now, I kind of believe them a little bit, but not really, especially because they always like to play tricks on each other and things like that, but it did put me a little bit off ever going there. I wasn't exactly sure how to get there in the first place, so I didn't really have to worry too much. And there was a couple of other old buildings dotted around, and sometimes whenever I encountered them, I would stop and stay as still as I could and try and listen. Because apparently you had to wait for 30 seconds before he would whistle at you, but it never really happened to me, so I didn't really believe it was haunted or any of that, or that I'd at least found the right one. So there was one particular stretch of season that I was on my station. It was a really nice time in the summer, and to be honest it was a little bit annoying because of the creatures outside. I'm talking about the bugs and things. Now, you couldn't really step foot outside without immediately getting swarmed by them, but it's something you grow used to with spray, and there's random little things you could do to try and stop them coming. So, on one of my days here, I had reports of hikers who got lost, and apparently there was 2 people that got lost with an old man. They were described as wearing 2 blue jackets, and the other person was wearing a darker colour, kind of like a beige or green almost. So I headed out into their relative vicinity to try and locate them. We weren't exactly sure where they were, but there was reports off of other hikers saying that these people looked pretty confused and almost a bit worried. With this in mind, I thought that I should bring lots of water because they're probably dehydrated by now. A lot of people like to go out hiking and don't necessarily bring enough water with them. They think it's okay to leave it in their car and just go and retrieve it again later, but I can tell you that's not really a smart idea. The amount of times I find people that are really struggling with dehydration and are actually about to go into a dangerous state of it because they haven't got water with them. Especially too, a lot of people wear too many clothes when they go hiking and they become far too hot. People aren't willing to abandon their clothes on the way in terms of jackets and things, so they just wear it and get too hot. I mean, for myself even, one day I remembered getting far too hot, and I was basically looking for somebody in a similar situation to this, but I started jogging when I found them with my jacket on, and by the end of it I could see weird colours where my vision started to fade, and when I stopped I felt like I was gonna faint. So yeah, lots of water with me and not too many clothes as I set out. Now, it didn't take me long to find them, and they were both just sitting under a tree. It was a little bit odd, and I radioed in that I found them and I was going to make sure they were okay. I waved to them and stood up shaking the bottle saying, "Hey, I'm here." Doing a smile and wave, but they didn't do anything back. I thought this was relatively weird, and I'm a little bit cautious now. I think maybe they're really in trouble, or maybe it's something more sinister, and I slowly approach. Now I've got to go and check if these guys are okay, but I'm actually a little bit paranoid myself. I eventually make my way over to them and it looks like they're both in shock. It's really weird. I give them water, which luckily they accept, and I say, "Can you tell me what's happened? Are either of you injured?" And I look over them looking for any signs of head trauma. You only have to look for simple things like cuts or bruises, but it can really be a telling sign. The problem you get is when somebody's got long hair or something and isn't bleeding and you don't know whether they're damaged. You can get an increase of intracranial pressure due to bleeding, which can be extremely dangerous because obviously the brain's contained in the skull, so the pressure doesn't have anywhere to go and it can potentially take your life. Worried that maybe one of them was hurt like this, I ask again what's wrong and they say, "Finally, thank God you're here." And they don't say much, they both stand up and start walking over to me. I stand up too and say, "Come on, let's get out of here." And we start heading back towards the station. While we're walking, I don't make too much conversation because obviously these people aren't really in a good way and I don't want to bombard them with questions right now. But I go over some basic medical checks and they seem fine, just like they're in shock. It was only when we started getting a lot closer to the station that one of them opened up. We saw a ghost. I'm not kidding, man. We literally saw somebody who kind of looked like you. We thought he was a ranger and went to see what was wrong. And he literally just vanished in through a tree. I'm not kidding, man. We both saw it. He then pauses and starts explaining some more. Apparently they looked all around for this guy, but there was no sign of him. They were convinced they'd seen a ghost and didn't know what to think of it. I asked them how long they'd seen him for and they said, I don't know, maybe like a minute or so. They then explained that some other hikers come, but they were too shocked to say anything and just sat by the tree in the shade. They said apparently at the start, this apparition, whatever you want to call it, waved them over, smiled, then just disappeared into a tree. They said it's like nothing they've ever seen before and neither of them have a medical history of things like this. I quickly write the report and one of my colleagues hands over, and I didn't get to know much else as I have to head back out again, but it really played on my mind. I mean, they were probably quite dehydrated, but they didn't seem to have any medical issues, which was odd. I kind of just chalked it up to probably they were just imagining it, and maybe it was just an animal that had slowly went up a tree they didn't see too well. But it was specifically a bizarre thing that I've always remembered. I never really encountered too many things like that while I was out there before, so it definitely stuck with me. But I was glad that I'd done my job and they were completely fine. Now, worried that there was some kind of person out there that might also need help, I decided that I should probably go and have a look in the area. Based off the slim chance that somebody was actually there, I had to investigate it. There's a couple of other guys who are going to investigate things within the vicinity to them, but this was proximal to me and I knew the exact spot, so of course I had to go there again. Now the walk was just as pleasant as before and I started to slam my own water, worried that I was going to become dehydrated myself. I was actually quite tired from carrying so much and the trek to these guys and back again. I didn't really understand the area they were in because they were well off of a path and they would have had to just walk idly through the trees for probably a good 20 minutes to get there, which if you're familiar with national parks or big forests is not really a good idea because that's how you get lost and how big search parties have to go out and people put their lives in danger to try and find them. So yeah, that didn't really add up. Now, like I said, the sun was beautiful and I was really enjoying the walk, to be honest. There was just enough light piercing through the treescape so I'd feel warm, but not too hot. Some of the bugs had actually picked up again now, which was relatively annoying, but I wasn't really too focused on them. I was just focused on what was happening up here. Now, I eventually get to the exact spot where we were before, and I realise that one of them have left a bottle behind and I pick it up. I need to return it back to them because it's their property later. And I head off in the direction that they told me that they'd seen the person. And surprise, surprise, I can't find anything. I had a good look round and I'm pretty sure I saw the big tree they were describing. And there's nothing there. I actually spent more of my time looking up, worried that some kind of animal was going to jump down and try and attack me than finding a person up there, but who knows, Maybe somebody was crazy and just decided to be Spider-Man for the day, but there was no mess. I couldn't find anything. I then start my walk back, and things are quite normal. I'm looking forward to getting back, and I actually want to make a coffee because I'm quite tired now. As I'm walking, I notice something odd. It almost looks like little orbs of light floating around where I am. This is particularly bizarre. It kind of looks like when you've got an old camera pointing somewhere in the dark and it picks up all the orbs. There was quite a few of them and it looked really pretty. No, it wasn't blossom and it wasn't spider webs, but this was bizarre. There seemed to be a couple of them, then probably hundreds all around. I wiped my eyes a couple of times and tried to grab one, but I couldn't seem to. They all moved too far in front of me. As I stopped in a moment in awe about how beautiful this is, I hear a whistle sound. Thinking it's one of my friends, I actually did a whistle back. They whistle back to me one more time, and I say, "Hey, I gotta get back now. I'll catch you at the station," and start laughing to myself. I think, wow, they've almost got me with that one, and I decide that I should just pick up the pace a bit so they don't try and pull any other pranks on me. What was kind of stuck in my mind at this point is how weird it was seeing all of the orbs of light. It was really beautiful and it gave a tranquil feel to where I was walking. It was kind of like the things you'd see in old books where they say about fairies and stuff, but it was definitely odd. I start to think that maybe this was some kind of plant that I didn't know about that blossomed heavily. And I make it back to the station. I didn't mention what I had heard or seen to any of the other guys, just thinking it was one of those things, and I make the coffee, and the other couple are gone. I then see the ranger that was looking after them, and he looks at me and says, "I don't know, man, there was something off about those people. You know, you hear all those rumours, but I don't believe in all of that, but they looked really scared, and they weren't exactly the kind of guys that I guess you would consider to pull any kind of games with us, you know?" And I said, "Yeah." He said one of them was actually a medic and the other was a teacher, so we know they're pretty trustworthy people. I said, "Yeah, but come on, they were just dehydrated, right?" He looked at me in the eyes and said, "I don't know, man. Be careful out there." And that was that. So I enjoyed my coffee and I ended up going home not too long after as the shift was over. But there wasn't really too much going on in my mind. I just started talking to my then girlfriend and now wife, and I was more excited about all of the trips and things we could do together, so that quickly filled my time up. Anyway, skip to a couple of days later and I'm back to work. And work was something that I loved, so it wasn't necessarily a bad thing. So I'm on station once again, and we get a call in again about apparently there's a disturbance up by the cabin. Now, I didn't register in the time what one they meant because there was a number of them, but it's one I hadn't been to before, and they said to me did I mind swinging by that way, which I had no problem doing. Now, the only thing I really didn't like about doing was going into one that had spiders and things. We get some pretty nasty ones out here, and I remember the time that one had fell onto my head, and I didn't realise for about 30 minutes until I brushed my hair and a big old spider fell on the floor with a plod. I tried kicking it but missed, and I didn't know where it went at home. But yeah, I'm pretty paranoid of the things. Also, you can get homeless people who live out there, or squatters, or God knows what, so it was never a good thing. Plus, not to mention, often they're dangerous and in risk of collapse because they're so old. And especially if there's any kind of insect that's decided to make the wood its home. So yeah, I wasn't really up for this one, to be honest with you. So I head out with all of my things and I make sure I have a nice hat on, because if any spiders are going to fall on me and try and attack me, I don't want them on my head. So that's what I do. Now, it was going to be about a good hours or so walk to get to this place, and again, it was a bit far off the path, so this wasn't good immediately. I ended up making it to the edge of the trail, and I start making my way in there. While I'm walking, I'm actually having issues trying to save my pants from the scrubs and things around me. There's all kinds of nettles and nasty things that are starting to get into my legs. I ended up getting stung by some plants a few times and it was really annoying. Especially because this is still in the summertime, so I'm quite hot at this moment, and the sweat is really not a nice feeling with the stinging of the plants. Now I get to where this place should be and I absolutely cannot find it. I re-triangulate my position multiple times and it should be exactly where I am. I should be proximal to it. I ended up putting in a few more calls to the station and eventually they guide me in the right direction again. I ended up finding an old building, but this one was really small. It almost looked like a small kind of shed thing where you'd store things. I say, yeah, I found it, let me go check it out. And there's a weird smell coming from this thing. It starts to smell really, really bad, and I'm starting to get worried that maybe it's the worst. I do have to investigate though, so I go closer and closer. I realise that there's an old door holding this thing shut, which is to a storage area. So I grab the biggest stick I can find and try and use it like a police battering ram. This didn't work and I sat down for a minute trying to figure out how I was going to open this. I then decide just to kick it, and I give it one big kick and it comes ajar slightly. And the smell was absolutely foul and overpowering, and lots of different flies and things pour out. Now I actually had to wait for a moment not to vomit, and I decided to go back and give it one last good kick, and it comes open thankfully. Now, covering my nose and with my torch, I peer in, and I find an animal's remains in there which clearly got stuck in there and couldn't get out. But it was disgusting. You could see by the fur on its body that it definitely wasn't a person, but it was too far gone to identify what it was, and I just leave it. I soon realised though that this couldn't have been the cabin that I was told to investigate. This was far too small, and it was a storage unit. Pretty grossed out, I actually took a while heaving up. I don't know how long it was, probably a good 5 or so minutes, but luckily I didn't vomit. But my god did I feel tempted to. As I'm sitting there, I then hear a whistle. It's just like the one I heard the other day. Only this time, I'm pretty sure I recognised it as one of the friends that I worked with. I start laughing and go to do the whistle again but stop because I'm not going to put my hands in my mouth and make myself vomit because of what I've just seen. So now I'm just sitting there laughing while this whistling goes on every couple of minutes for probably 10 minutes or so before stopping. It's coming from the top right of where I am, and I decide that I might as well prank my friend back. I want to tell him that I found some kind of computer in that storage unit and I want him to go and investigate because I can't move it. It's locked. He's pretty good with computers and he's pretty good at breaking things open, so I know that he'll love to go and try and crack open the side of the computer case and get it out. Or just some other stuff like that. Now, of course this was a complete lie because there's just a weird animal body there, but I just want my friend to get close and maybe push him a bit as a joke. So yeah, I start walking over and the whistling stops. It's very clear where it was coming from before, and I know I have to walk quite a way to get there because of how quiet the whistling is. Now, I probably walked for a good 4 minutes when I can see the silhouette of something up ahead. You can just make out that it's all black with its head and shoulders, just kind of lurking around, then slowly going behind a tree. I say hey, or call out my friend's name, but I don't get a reply. I think that's odd and I continue walking. I eventually make it up to exactly where I thought the whistling was and I can't hear anything, or my friend. Thinking that maybe he's just went off again, I decide that I should head back. I turn around to head in the direction that I come from, and suddenly I can see the cabin, one that I haven't seen before. This is it. This is a cabin I was supposed to find. That's odd. Thinking maybe my friend's already investigated it, I start to head back, but realise that he probably hasn't found this too. It's kind of in some overgrown area, and it looks pretty dated, but it looks like somebody lived in there long ago. Now I have to be careful because we've had reports of activity in here, and they're even seeing a light on, but I can't see any of this at this point. Now, as I'm observing it slowly walking closer, I'm sure I can make out the silhouette of a person again in the top. I think this is pretty bizarre because it's kind of like a one-story thing with an attic above it. But I don't know why anybody would be in there. I was more convinced it was some kind of animal that was living in there that I'd just seen. But I don't know. So I start to walk over relatively carefree at this point, convinced it's just going to be an animal, but bracing for the spiders and other things I do not want to encounter. Like I said, I really don't like these things, and I'm talking myself out of being worried by them. At this point in time, this was by far my biggest concern. Now, I get to only a few meters away, and I realise the door's broken. It's broken to the point that you don't need to use force to enter, you can literally just nudge it. I turn on my light and I see nothing. I quickly pan around and yes, there is a big old spider. It's not far from the door, so I duck very far under it, and I manage to convince myself not to look up. You can see that there's not really a floor above or anything. It's kind of just like a very thin top, but nowhere for you to stand really. You know, if you go up there, you'll basically fall through the top, so there's no real worries about me doing that. I scan in the first room, and this place is really ancient looking, like well over 100 years old. I can't really see too much, but there's some hooks and things where I guess I used to do hunting and whatnot. Now, there is an underground area to this, but I didn't want to go in there because of the spiders, so I decided to avoid it. There's basically a hole in the corner that I could probably go down, but I'm definitely not going to do that. I think whatever's under there can stay under there, and it's not for me to investigate. Now, I turn to head back, having thoroughly searched through most of it, when I hear a whistle again. This time it sounds like it's next to me. With a gasp, I turn the torch round and quickly do a 360, but I can't find anything. That's when I slowly look up and realise that it's coming from above me. There must be something on the roof or up there. I don't know what it is at this point, thinking maybe it's some kind of owl or something injured up there. I decide that I should probably go and look. I quickly pan my torch around and look throughout all of the top thing. I can just about see through it because it's kind of transparent slightly, and you can see there's nothing up there. So I decide just to give this old owl one chance of rescue. I make my way up to the crawl space where you can basically go in, and there's a very small ladder here. Hoping that maybe there's some kind of light or something that I can pull on, I slowly make my way up the ladder. I put my arm through and go to pull on the light switch where I think it should hang from. That's when I feel something on my arm. I feel 2, 3, 4, 5 pressure points and something warm up my arm, and I can feel a lifting force. Almost not registering what's happened, I slowly turn my head up and I can see a human arm pulling me up. It's not like a normal human arm though. This looks like it comes from a corpse and is all battered and bruised and very black and dark looking. I let out a scream like a girl. I quickly jump down and the arm just seems to vanish back into where it come from. I grab the torch again and quickly shine the light up, thinking something's about to chase me, but I can't see anything. There's no shadow of where the body should be on the top, nothing. With that, I sprint and kick the door open, and I half fall down in the process. I start sprinting as fast as I can, and to make it even worse, a spider fell on me, which I basically punch off my body. I actually hurt myself quite a bit from the force of it with the adrenaline. I sprint and quickly glance back as I'm starting to get away from this, and I quickly look onto the roof, hoping to see some kind of person up there that could explain this, but I don't see anything. I sprint and make it quite a good way into the woods. Not really entirely sure if I'm being followed or not, I decide I have to keep up a long distance running pace. This is actually really bad for my legs because I'm running off the trail at this point, and I'm really getting my legs cut up, but I don't care. Luckily, being a ranger, I'm in pretty good shape and I managed to keep up a really nice pace. What just happened? I'm actually so scared that I don't radio in anything to the team and I just try and sprint back as quick as I possibly can. I start sipping on water where I'm trying to keep myself going without stopping for as long as possible. Eventually this created a new issue where I actually had to vomit a bit while I was jogging, but I didn't care. I quickly sip some more water to keep me going, and eventually the pace catches up with me and I have to slow down. I frantically look to my left and right, desperately trying to see if there's anything chasing me, but I can't see anything. I'm not much further from the station now, so I put my hands on my knees and try and capture my breath. Now I can hear some of the sounds of insects around me and some landing on my skin, but I don't care. Where I was jogging I probably look so vascular and like a good meal to them, but I don't care. It honestly only takes me about 3 minutes to catch my breath, which really surprised me, and I start walking now covered in sweat. I'm only about 3 minutes from the station, and I go to radio in what's happened, but I realise there's no point. I'm nearly back at the station. There's some other people outside and they kind of look at me like I'm a crazy man. Looking down at my arms I can see why. I've gone very red from the jogging, and I quickly open the door. Some guys rushed over to me and say, "What happened, are you okay?" And I stop them, I say, I'm fine. It's just something weird happened when I found that cabin. I say, I'm sure somebody was up there in that attic. I heard them whistling, and when I gone up there, something grabbed me, and the guys started bursting out laughing. They say, "Yeah, right. Did you actually go there or not?" I say, "I told you I went up there and I think somebody's in there, in the attic," but they say that's not possible. How could somebody be standing on paper thin tarp? And they completely dismiss my claims. Really frustrated, I go to the bathroom just to try and get some of the sweat off of me, and I look at myself in the mirror for a while, when one of the older rangers comes in and says, "Yep, you met him. Don't worry, son. I know they're laughing at you, but I believe you. We've been having reports of weird things happening there for absolutely years. Don't worry, you'll get used to it." "Used to it?" I shout at him. "How could I possibly get used to that? Why don't they believe me?" And they say they do. I think they're just scared of it too. Now, this was a number of years ago that it happened, and luckily I've never been requested to go back there again, and to be honest, if I did, I wouldn't go. I still have nightmares about it to this day. Every time I have to put my hand into somewhere I don't know, I'm pretty sure I have some kind of trauma where I start sweating and shaking a bit, half expecting something to grab me again. If this was some kind of animal or some kind of homeless person, I could sit with that and that's fine. But their arm literally looked like it belonged to a dead person. But the rangers were right, there's no way anybody could have been up there. I doubt this could support the weight of a small animal, let alone a fully grown human. But I'm sure that's what grabbed me, except it wasn't. It wasn't like a living person. I don't know, I just really can't get the right words out to describe how I feel trying to recount this story to you all. It was almost like I was touched by something I shouldn't have been, and I really feel like something had stalked me out there in those woods. Nothing like it has ever happened since, and I'm not much longer from changing jobs now, but it just does not sit right with me. I hate the fact that when things like this happen, people don't always take you seriously, but they don't see the nightmares that I have because of this, and they don't understand how much it still affects me even to this day. In college, I lived on top of a mountain road, but still only 5 minutes downtown through a wooded road. There was a few 100-plus-year-old oaks in the yard, slab stone porch built by hand. I lived in the studio apartment that was outside of the main house. Now the main house is haunted, but my shack is cozy. The woods up there are weird too. I never really was in the main house at all, but the three who lived there said some nights you couldn't fall asleep because of the noise, like floorboards creaking, thumps, knocks, etc. My experience happened outside. Like I said, I hunted small game up there, as there must have been a rabbit colony in the vicinity, plus a few squirrels. Often out there, I would get the distinct feeling that I was being stalked myself. Keep in mind, this stand of the forest is only several acres across, but was preserved mainly because of the historic oak trees scattered around. It's old woods. Now I would hear laughter like children's laughter, but not quite creepy like in a creepy movie. It was a bit distorted, and almost like flirty giggles that you might have heard if you imagined a fairy was there. It would come from different directions and sometimes at the same time. I eventually decided to stop following it and hunt. It never did stop. I would spend time in the afternoon in town having a drink or hanging out at a friend's place. I'd finally have enough liquid courage to hike up the trail in the dark. That laughter would be replaced by noise, just like things running around and dashing by the trees. Now, being an outdoorsman, you know the woods are noisy at night, particularly in the southern Appalachians. But this is different. It was dead silence out there in that stand at night except for this rushing, and from an unseen feet. Like no game could be doing this. Now, these steps were like some kind of things rushing around me. It's really weird. It would kind of cross the trail up ahead and behind me, then alongside, but I could never see anything. I was a big time night owl back then, and was regularly up doing schoolwork into 3 or 4 AM. One such night it snowed a fresh 20 inches or so, decent accumulation for the area. Our yard and woods were like a paradise for me and my dog. I was excited to hunt around the next day for tracks and to see if I couldn't locate the rabbit den, which I hadn't previously. I was woken up and the dog came scratching to get in, not really like he's frantic or anything, but just trying to get in. It's odd though because she's a husky. I decided to call it a night too and went out for a cigarette, and it's now about 3:24 AM. I can still see it on the top of my MacBook display before closing it. I went out and noted the clouds were dispersed a bit and the moon was bright on the snow. I lit my cigarette and just looked across the fence into the woods when something caught my eyes. It looks exactly like the silhouette of someone leaning up on an oak tree. Like, you'd see somebody with a palm planted up against a wall and arms straight leaning against it. It's not moving, so I can't tell if I'm just imagining that the light is making it move or what. So I walked further to the end of the porch, and as soon as I stepped out onto the fresh snow, it took off. Now, this thing is tall, with my estimations being that it was at least 7 foot tall. It actually runs along the border of the fence and back into the woods. It was hairless as far as I can tell and completely naked. Otherwise though, it was a form of a tall, skinny man. I decided to quickly go inside and grab my boots and rifle and flashlight and go and check the tracks. Now they have to be size 14 or 15 bare feet. It ran along the fence and onto the tree stretches into the backyard as if heading into the woods. But then the tracks just ended about 20 inches short of the wood line. I don't know if it jumped into a tree, but there was no more tracks for me to trace. It was literally as though it just vanished. So this actually happened to my boyfriend who is from Mexico. He had many experiences that most Westerners wouldn't believe, as Mexico is an intensely paranormal place, but that's probably due to its history. Now, when he was 15, he was on his grandfather's ranch in an area. It's a remote place with only a couple of distinctly scattered neighborhoods, and his father's land was big and spread out. One night, his grandfather asked him to put out the bonfire next to the house. He put it out and went back to bed and fell asleep. A few hours later, his grandfather came back and scolded him for not putting out the fire. This happened routinely for months. One time, after he put out the fire, he saw the light from the fire through his bedroom window, and he saw a female putting some logs onto the fire. He assumed it's his aunt and went back to sleep, and the next day, the grandfather yelled at him again, so my boyfriend told him that it was just his aunt that started it again, probably just to heat up water or something. When he asked about it, his aunt said that she had not been out there at all for a fire, and she was the only female living there. What also began happening at the same time was mysterious fires. Now, my boyfriend and sometimes his friends would see a woman walking across his grandfather's property over a hill. They saw her several times over the course of a few months. My boyfriend said he couldn't figure out what she was doing there or where she come from, because they knew all the people that live close by, and in that part of Mexico, people don't just generally trespass on other people's property because it's potentially dangerous. He said she was solid and looks like a real person, with red bean jeans and blondish hair, but that when she would walk by there wasn't any sound, like the wind stopped blowing and everything was still. One day he was wandering around the ranch looking for good grass to give the cows. On the far side of the ranch up the hill, he found a patch of some pretty nice grass and started pulling it up, and ended up pulling up part of the blanket. He said the blanket looked old, but not that old, like it had been there for a couple of months. So he started to pull up the blankets, and he saw two arms tied together from behind, execution style. He said there was still some meat on the arms, although the body was mostly bones by this point. He immediately could see it was a woman with red jeans and long blondish hair that he would recognize as the woman he saw walking across the ranch. They called the police detectives who investigated and said this probably happened from the 90s. Now, after they had disposed of the body correctly, he had never saw the woman walking up the hill again. This took place when I was younger, probably around 19 or 20. I'm 27 now, going on 28. I used to drive around the countryside for hours on end, sometimes up to 6 hours, and smoked cigarettes while listening to music and just daydreaming. I'd been through a lot, and it was a way for me to let off steam and digest everything that happened to me. There is part of a route that goes into the southern part of my state that actually takes you to Maryland. If I'm not mistaken, if you go all the way along, you go to Florida. It's on a road that I'm very fond of because it intersected with lots of interesting places. It could take you to cities and beaches alike, all the while somehow remaining pretty isolated and rural. On one of those day trips, I was driving through a heavily wooded area that opened up to a field lined with trees to my left. I was pretty zoned out at this point, but something on the side of the road immediately caught my attention. In fact, it seemed that time slowed, so I could see this apparition with more vivid detail than any random artifact that I would ever glance at off the side of the road. What I saw was an older, balding man dressed in full Catholic priest garb. His mouth was open in what appeared to be grief, staring up through the sky with large glasses. He was standing in front of a dead deer. It was dark from what I recall, and there was maybe 3 or 4. Behind the deers was a 1970s/80s Crown Vic style police car without its lights on, It had no markings on it whatsoever to identify what county it was from. No one was inside the vehicle. I don't even think it had the engine running. Now, this is pure speculation, but it almost appeared as if the vehicle had been parked there for a day or so because it was completely sedentary. The other weird thing about the vehicle is that it had no damage on the front end to show what was responsible for hitting the dead deer, nor did it seem at all bloody or anything, or even mangled. It just didn't make sense. Now I took a step back and, rehashing this scene as a whole, it had the appearance of being staged or set up somehow, as if all of its parts of props in a play or movie. Every part of it was so odd and so still. For the speed it was travelling at, the glance I cast on this spectacle could have only lasted for about a maximum of 3 seconds, but the moment seemed to be quadrupled, and it's an impression that really grabbed my imagination and felt like bad news, really bad news. I was gasping for air, almost crying. Have I seen a ghost? Was it a warning of a deity? Did the forces that shape time and space momentarily flex in this rural corner of Virginia, and just so happened that I was the only witness? Even passing by the same spot from this trip, I really can't think of what it could have been. I have no answers to any of my questions, only a lack of closure, and its scar on my brain. I was backpacking last week in a national forest in northwest Pennsylvania with a friend of mine and also his teenage son. We hiked up the Minister Creek Trail and set up camp that night about 4 miles away from the trailhead. We only saw 2 other parties that day, and neither were overnighting on the trail. We explored the area we camped in extensively to find the best spot, and did not see any other campers within at least a mile in either direction. The rest of the forest is heavy, with growth hillsides on either side of the valley, without anywhere good to set up camp. At about 2 AM, I was awoken by the sound of drumming. It sounded like a single drum and a rhythmic beat. If anybody is familiar with the Cleveland Indians baseball team, now known as the Guardians, they have a guy who would beat a drum in a similar fashion. It was loud and close, actually reverberating throughout the valley that we camped in. If I were to guess, I would say it sounded as if it was within 100 yards of our location. I got out of my tent to investigate, and my friend had also been woken up by the sound. We couldn't see anything other than the dark woods around us. This continued for at least 2 hours until I was able to fall back asleep. The next morning, we woke up and all is normal. We continue in on our hike and didn't see any other campers around. I still have no clue what it was. Now my family moved from upstate New York to a small town near Brenderton, Florida. I moved with them. Their house is a wilderness neighborhood one that hasn't existed there for too long. Native Americans actually used to occupy the land, from what we've heard. My room had a massive sliding glass window with no screens and was the only one in the house that faces directly out into the woods out back. Right when we moved in, I felt uneasy about being near the window, looking into the woods or having my blinds open. A few weeks after moving in, I started having what I think are night terrors. I would wake up screaming and thinking that there was someone in my room trying to get me. I've never ever had this as a child. It was freaky and unnerving for both me and my sleeping partner. I started hearing knocking on my window at night. At first, I thought I was hearing things, but then I started getting really freaked out. I always ignored it and never went up to the window, looked outside or opened it. My partner never heard this. He was always asleep and brushed me off when I told him. I just adamantly kept my window locked from there on out. Then, I started hearing my neighbour/friend next door knocking on my window at night, whispering my name and asking me if I'm up. and if I wanted to come out and smoke with her. I answered this by saying a sleepy no and go back to sleep. I asked her about this and she is absolutely certain she never told me this. I start feeling very alone and powerless, wondering if I'm actually losing my mind now. Now one night, I was putting a lucky protective crystal on my window for protection. Side note, don't judge me for this, and I don't know if this was happening in my head or not. I didn't know what to do for protection, but anyway, I woke up and the crystal was still in the same spot, but half broken, as though it was hit by lightning. I actually saw a black figure in my room a couple of times. Nothing ever happened. I would only see them, and they would be gone, and it was always at night when I was barely awake. I figured there were spirits in the home, so I did a couple of things that helped mitigate that, using salt, burning cedar wood, and spraying holy water on walls. Our back porch was screened in, and a nice place to sit outside. I meditated a couple of times out there and heard all the wildlife and creatures outside. The noises would stop and it would just be silent sometimes, like dead air. I would listen for anything and just hear nothing aside from creepy snapping branch sounds. I would run inside after that. We had bobcats, raccoons, alligators and wild boars, so I figure it's an animal. Luckily I moved back to upstate New York for personal and career reasons, so obviously nothing else happened to me there. I visited my family around Halloween time, about a year after moving. My sister and I stayed up watching Pet Sematary and started talking about the creepy stuff, and she turns to me and said, "Did I tell you that he thought he saw some kind of slender man in the woods?" And I immediately get freaked out and sleep horribly. I asked my dad what he saw and he said it's a very tall creature, probably 9 feet, extremely skinny, almost looking like a tree, moving abnormally fast through the woods in broad daylight. I had a few unsettling experiences in the woods, but this is unquestionably the strangest one. I've been mulling over it for a couple of years and can't really come up with a rational explanation. A few details have been changed to protect my identity, but the story is 100% true. So in 2018, my partner and I drove up to a national forest in Oregon for a day hike in early summer. The area was somewhat remote, but nothing too isolated. Hiking is huge in the Pacific Northwest. There are plenty of other people on these trails at any given time, especially during peak season. Because of this, we chose a less popular trail in the hopes of getting some alone time. It was approximately a 6-mile out and back, moderately difficult hike with a waterfall near the end. It followed a river and didn't intersect with any other trails. Simple, right? We are both experienced hikers in good physical condition, so we had no reason to think we needed anything but day packs with a couple of litres of water and sandwiches. Getting back before dark should have been a piece of cake. We set out sometime afternoon. At first, we took it slow and wandered around the riverbank for a few minutes. I found a cool animal bone and we mused over what it might be. It was very clearly a vertebrae from a large mammal, so we guessed it was probably a deer bone, but I'm a little morbid and I like collecting things of that nature, so it goes into my pack. That might not have anything to do with what happened next, but I feel like I should mention it since it was out of the ordinary. The hike next to the waterfall was beautiful. We passed a few other people on our way back to the trailhead, but for the most part, we had the place to ourselves. We stopped a few times to look at wildlife or take photos of flowers. I was tracking our progress on my Fitbit, so I always knew how many miles we'd travelled and how much time we had before sunset. We reached the waterfall at about 3.2 miles. We matched what the map said. I paused my watch and settled on a large boulder to rest and eat our lunch. Another young couple was there with their dog. We said hello and then minded our business. That's when things went wrong. As we packed our stuff up and prepared to leave, my partner slipped off the boulder and twisted his ankle badly. The other couple heard his surprised scream as the water splashed and they rushed over to help. The three of us hauled him back to dry land and assessed the injury. None of us are doctors, but we thought it was a sprain. The swelling had already begun, and he was in serious pain. He couldn't barely stand. Upon realizing this, the male half of the couple started backing away and seemed anxious to leave. I asked him if he could go to get help, but he didn't respond, nor does his wife. They both turned around and started booking it up the trail with the dog trotting behind them. I called out to them in frustration, but they didn't look back. Needless to say, we didn't have cell service to reach that deep in the woods, so we couldn't contact anyone else. We have to hike back. It'll be okay, I said to Michael. It's only 3 miles, you can do it. We shifted the water bottles and a modest amount of gear into my pack so he wouldn't have to carry anything, and made decent progress. Now, I was actually tracking the hike on my Fitbit. After about 2 miles, Michael ran out of the stream and we rested again. I told him to lean on me to take the weight off the injured ankle. That's even though that I'm a head shorter than him, it just seems to help. We're almost there, just 1 more mile, I said. Despite the setback, we're in pretty high spirits to be honest, and the sun was still coming up and the woods were beautiful still. We actually make light out of our predicament. Michael joked that he can't do anything without getting hurt or breaking something, and I comforted him. We both actually thought that the ordeal was nearly over. Eventually I realised we've been walking longer than expected. I assumed it only felt that way because we were moving at a slower pace, but when I checked my watch and saw that we'd gone further than a mile, I started to worry. And we're at nearly 6.6 in total. That meant the walk back to the trailhead was longer than that to the waterfall. But that can't be right. But I figured it must have been a mistake at some point. Maybe I hadn't started the tracker until we'd already travelled a ways at the beginning. Regardless, the parking lot had to be around the next curve in the trail. But it wasn't. We went another half mile or so before stopping to assess the situation. Over 7 miles total and we're still not back. What the heck? I checked the map on my Fitbit and saw that there aren't any gaps. It was a straight line from the beginning to the end, with the line doubling back on itself, indicating that we're on the same route. But where's the trailhead? We talked it over and concluded that it had to be a glitch. Michael was adamant that we hadn't passed the trailhead, and we couldn't have taken a wrong turn because there were no other trails, plus the scenery was all familiar. We saw things we remembered passing on our way to the waterfall. It was definitely the same trail, and well maintained too. Then a big wide dirt track that followed down the river eventually veers off into undergrowth. We shouldn't have been able to lose the trail. It's almost impossible. At that point, we start to feel demoralized, but what could we do except keep going? Our phones also don't have service, and Michael's in a lot of pain and struggling to put weight on the strained ankle. It was twice the size of the other ankle. He was sweating and I was sweating. The whole thing starts to feel like a nightmare. When we went another mile and still didn't reach the trailhead, we panic. Night falls quickly into the forest and we had little daylight left. We were almost out of water and had no gear or other food. We basically only have the flashlights on our phones. Of course, we cursed ourselves for not bringing the supplies, but we're only supposed to be out here for a couple of hours, so just a short hike, and we have no idea how it could have gone so wrong. Out of desperation, I yelled for help. We'd seen no other people since that strange couple had abandoned us near the waterfall, but I'm sure that we had to be close enough to the parking lot. That didn't mean there was anyone there. But we both freaked out. I was willing to make a fool of myself if it meant rescue. To our dismay, nobody answered. We're alone. In an attempt to get to grip, we reasoned that maybe we had really passed the trailhead where we started. Maybe we were so focused on keeping him off of his bad foot that we'd simply missed it, and were hiking towards the next trailhead. We were pretty sure that wasn't the case, but it was the only explanation that makes sense. We were definitely still on the same trail, and though we couldn't be certain, it seemed like the landscapes had changed. We were no longer recognizing any of the landmarks except for the river, and that seemed to support our theory that we've gone too far. We knew we weren't exactly walking in circles, that isn't possible, so should we turn back? We mulled over for a few more minutes. If we were wrong, backtracking now would mean that we definitely spend the night here, and it's not really an option, so we press on. I'm not crazy, I keep telling myself, asking almost. Now, the initial hike was only 3 miles, and we went 3 miles into the waterfall. Yes, my husband agreed. Now, we walked a lot further than that. We should have gotten back a long time ago, so I don't really understand what's happening. When night fell, we pick up the pace, and my partner stopped leaning on me and limped down as fast as he can. He said the adrenaline dulled the pain of his injury and gave him motivation to continue. The part of Oregon that we're in is mountain lion country, and I'd just read about a mountain lion attack a few weeks prior to our hike. Being caught out there in the dark was absolutely the last thing we wanted, but there was nothing we could do about it. We were actually quite scared, and my partner shines his light on the path ahead to make sure we didn't lose our footing, and I shone mine at the trees scanning for cat eyes. Now my Fitbit says we've gone 9 miles now. After 9.5, we finally saw the sign for the trailhead and scrambled towards it. Relief didn't completely wash over me though, because I expected that we'd either have to hike back to where we started or trudge alongside the road for a few more miles. There was simply no way this could be at the trailhead. It was 3 miles past where it should have been, and as we climbed to the short set of steps up to the parking lot, sweaty, thirsty and exhausted and completely unnerved, I then hoped to see my car. But I see my car, and we're at the same trailhead. For a moment, we stare in shock. Our fear and misery was replaced by sheer confusion, and we just stood there. Then a twig snapped somewhere in the woods behind us and broke my spell. We hurried across the parking lot towards the car, and in those few seconds, I felt an intense dread. The best way I can describe it is as though you're in a nightmare, when something is pursuing you, but you're moving in slow motion, like your legs just won't cooperate. This is the only time I've ever felt like it outside of a dream. We managed to pile into the vehicle and peel out of there, and I'm shaking. And my partner's reeling about time distortion and dehydration, and we must have lost our bearings. We got out of the national forest and onto the next highway, and it was a while before we encountered any other cars. I didn't fully relax until we made it back to civilization. Neither of us can figure out exactly what happened, and my partner was on crutches for several months after it. I still haven't been able to find out exactly what happened, and I still get chills thinking about this. Now this is a very long story, and I'm going to try my best to write things out exactly as they happened. So I lived in Georgia, the state, in a rural town not far from a major city, and there's a set of woods that's behind our house, and it divides 2 neighborhoods. It's about a mile wide, if that. Strange occurrences have always happened around here, things like random trash, tarps, etc. But I should mention that it's a swampy marsh, which has woods around it, so camping in there is impossible. Now one night, I was taking our dog out. He stays in the back half of the house due to him not liking other dogs. I took him out to the side door and walked around the house to the fence. For some reason, when he left the house, he was absolutely terrified. He didn't want to go out. Very unusual for a dog who's quick to snatch someone's soul if prompted. Not thinking about it, we press on, and he went to the bathroom and we walked back. This is when I noticed it, or rather heard it, the crunching of leaves. At first I thought it was one of our dozens of cats, until I realised that it's matching me. If I walked, you could hear it walking. If I stopped, it would. There's a small clearing between the woods and one of the sheds. That's when I saw it. My dog was first to see something, then I saw, a creature. It was taller than my shed, so probably a good 8 feet tall, and darting across the clearing at crazy speed. My dog, who isn't scared of anything, bolts so quick that I dropped his leash and he ran to the door whining. I'm quickly behind him. Once inside, I quickly bolted the door and ran to tell my girlfriend what happened. She immediately really wanted to investigate, saying it's probably a woodland creature, and armed with 2 flashlights, we actually go out. Now, we can't see anything but can hear it, and now something's about 20 feet away. Now there's no eyes, not even an animal call, just rustling, and my girlfriend, now scared, heads out for the home. I decide to check in with the neighbours to see if maybe one of the dogs got out, and I call my neighbour, but he confirms that all of the dogs are accounted for. Now my neighbour's interested and comes out with his gun to investigate. We heard rustling, or maybe running, about 100 yards away in the thick swampy woods. Way too thick for a person to walk, let alone run in. And then, it stops. It was dead silent. We're scanning and on edge when we hear something, but then nothing, and bam, it's 5 feet in front of us sprinting at me. It slammed the fence so hard it rocked it back and forth, and Dave shot randomly. But then there's nothing. We never saw it. Never heard it get close to us again. As I mentioned, the woods are thick, too thick to run in, so this thing teleported silently in front of us and hit the gate. Spooked, we're about to run, then we heard it. It was human in nature but not English, almost like, I don't know, an alien. Not a language really. Now Dave, a hunter for at least 40 years, still can't explain what it is. Anyway, after we heard that, we bolted, and he covered me as I ran into my home. Not 10 minutes later, we both heard a loud explosion from the woods. It actually rattles my house and knocks the power out, and I ran outside to see if it was there, but of course there's nothing. And Dave runs out and says that he's experienced the same thing. Moments later, neighbours from all around come down to our cul-de-sac and agree that they heard it from behind our house. 911 is called and police officers come out, and 2 of them separately interview us, and both of our stories matched. Now the police officers actually refused to go near the woods. They took a report and left. To this day, we're still not sure what the encounter was. Also, Dave doesn't go outside at night anymore. Now the next night, earlier in the day, my mother, a police officer for a town 40 miles away, installs 2 motion trail cameras on the wood's edge. They're brand new, keep that in mind. Now thinking that maybe we'd see something, we wait for nightfall, and later that evening, I went outside to feed our outdoor cats, and that's when I heard it again, rustling. This time not taking any chances, I ran inside and told everyone what I heard. They all piled by our back door and urged me to go out there and look. Reluctantly I agree. I took my flashlight and walked to the edge of the woods. Knowing there was a trail cam covering this area, I figured it would be on the trail cam, and I can sacrifice this. As I got to the wood's edge, I could hear rustling. I'm shaking at this point because I could tell it was maybe less than 15 feet in front of me. Everybody was watching me from the door, and then it goes quiet, or so I thought. Just as I'm scanning with my flashlight trying desperately to see a normal woodland creature, I hear this boom, and something hits the ground just beneath my feet. It was so close that I was sure it would lunge out and brush and snag me. I dropped the flashlight and literally ran 100 yards back to the house in what felt like 2 seconds. I screamed, "Get in the house," and everybody did. They heard and felt the thud too, and our neighbour Dave called my mum-in-law to see if she heard the crash, and apparently she did 700 yards away. Once the adrenaline died down, we decided to check the trail cams, and crazily, they stopped at 11:47 PM and the rest is corrupted, but they're both brand new, and the memory cards are. We reset everything and put them down again, but unfortunately, we haven't seen anything or heard anything like it since.